Cool. Well, let's kick off. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning for the latest State of Ransomware webinar. By way of introduction, so I'm Lewis Martin, one of the business development managers over in the Sophos team at TD Synnex. I'm joined by Jon Hope from Sophos's side, who's going to present for us today. As usual with this kind of webinar, any questions we have throughout, pop them in the Q&A box down the bottom or at the side, wherever you're seeing it on your screen. And if we can't answer it as we go, then we will pitch those questions to Jon at the end, where we'll have 5 or 10 minutes to wrap up. So with that, without any further ado, Jon Hope, across to you.
Fab. Thanks, Lewis, for the intro. Yeah, and if you can keep an eye on that, those questions and answers for me, that'd be fab. I can't see it on my screen, so yeah, I'm going to rely on you to read those
No
questions
worries
out
at
when we get
all.
to the end. Thank you. Cool. Right. So, quick introduction to myself, first of all. I'm sure many of you know who I am already, but if you're not familiar, welcome. My name's Jon Hope. I'm Senior Technology Evangelist here at Sophos. I've been at Sophos since 2011, and I've done lots of exciting things during my time. So, when I joined, I was running the channel in the UK and Ireland for a firewall vendor that Sophos acquired. And I've been here ever since. Moved from channel management to sales specialist in the firewall, moved into engineering. Now I kind of spend most of my time hanging out in marketing really because they get access to all really interesting stats, some of which I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I hang out with the lovely guys and girls in marketing because they have access to all that interesting research. Outside of working at Sophos. Just to give you an extra dimension, my hobby of choice is sailing, which is a perfectly natural thing to do for a Midlander who lives about as far from open water as you could possibly get. And I like to do more work as well. So as you can see on the screen there, we have a lovely little animal ambulance there, which is my wife and I's business. Keeps us occupied. So if you want to know how to do CPR on a dog, then chuck that in the questions and I'll pick that up with you one to one. Propelled me to the dizzy heights of being on ITVs this morning at one point as well. So that escalated quite quickly. Outside of all that stuff, I've got two kids that act as crew members when I'm sailing and take up whatever time's left. So that's a bit about me. But you probably didn't come here to hear about me. You're probably more interested in the threat landscape. And what I'm going to do during this session, given that we're talking to partners here, is just talk a little bit more about the research that we conduct and how that can open conversations with end users. And I could tell you the world is scary, but you'd expect somebody who works for a cybersecurity vendor to tell you that. So I'm not going to tell you that directly. What I am going to do is base the information you'll see here on some of that fantastic research that I've already alluded to. And actually one of the source as well. So we have a very interesting unit within Sophos, which is the counter threat unit, whose job it is to do many tasks, including infiltrating cybercrime gangs and really understanding how they work, the tools that are available at their disposal, the tactics and tools that they use. So we're going to see some research from them. We're also going to see the results of a survey. Now, if you've been around Sophos for a long time, you will know that the state of ransomware is a staple of the Sophos calendar. It's now in its sixth year. And this is an independent survey. Although it's commissioned by Sophos, we very, very explicitly ask the market research company that conducts this for us to select recipients at random. So just bear in mind when you see the stats that most, if not all of the people who responded are not Sophos customers, but it does give us a really interesting cross section. So if you want to get the report in its entirety, I know that we always spend our time telling people not to click on QR codes. It's on a Sophos slide. You can trust this one. If you're really paranoid, then open your Sophos mobile app and scan it with the safe QR code scanner. But that will take you straight through to the state ransomware report, which interestingly is a customer-facing document. So you can put that in front of prospects anytime you like. It's a really good document. So yeah, the recipients in this scenario, 3,400 of them experienced at least one ransomware outbreak in the 12 months running up to the survey. Selected from 17 different countries. Organizations ranging from 100 seats to 5,000 seats. And basically, these are IT managers, budget holders, decision makers, the kind of people that you are talking to on a day-to-day basis. And we ask them all about their experiences of cyber and the research tells us an awful lot of interesting information. In particular, one of the first questions that people always ask is, why do organizations fall victim? And that's quite interesting. So if we take a look at the stats, straight into statistics, if you look at the purple graph on here, the purple line is the 2025 set of results. And what you will see is for the third year, if not more in succession, exploited vulnerabilities is still the main reason that cyber criminals get into an organization. And what we mean by exploited vulnerabilities is basically software that's not been updated, it's not been patched, you've got legacy systems in your estate, or there's some kind of loophole that the cyber criminals have been able to get hold of and use that to infiltrate the organization. Now, on the face of it, you would say that's a technology problem. And there is definitely a technology slant associated with this. But I would argue that actually this is the first of a number of human factors surrounding ransomware. And let me explain that in more detail. Most organizations know they should be patching, right? This is not a massive surprise to organizations. The software needs updating to keep secure. However, many organizations fail to patch successfully, either because they simply don't have the expertise available, or that they have the expertise, but those individuals, they just simply don't have enough time, and patching always gets pushed to the bottom of the list. So we often hear from organizations, and explore this in more detail, that they have too many dashboards, too many consoles, particularly too many cybersecurity products, and it's just a distraction that means that patching just gets pushed down and down the priority order. So like I said, while on the face of it, you could say, well, this is a tech problem. Actually, it's probably more of a people problem, because genuinely people try to patch, but they just can't do it because they're inundated with other tasks. Then if you move down, the grey area kind of dissipates quite quickly, because we see, if we bundle these three things in together, compromised credentials, malicious emails, and phishing, these are all definitely people problems. And this speaks to a trend that we're observing, where the cyber criminals realize that, generally speaking, organizations are getting better protected from a technology stance. The capability of detection software, such as Sophos Endpoint, to protect organizations is getting better. So actually what they're doing is they're shifting tactics, and instead they are targeting the humans. Okay, because first of all, you can't patch a human. Wouldn't it be great if we all came with a little USB socket and we could just download security data? It doesn't work like that. Um, Humans are emotional beings. We make bad decisions all the time. We're inherently unpredictable. And the cyber criminals know all these things. And what they are doing increasingly is they are creating phishing emails or scenarios that fit individuals' realities so perfectly that they will actually, kind of inverted commas, fall for it. They'll click the link, they'll carry out the action, because the cyber criminals have done research in advance. They understand the organization, they understand their supply chain, they understand the kind of key personnel, they understand all of that background, which means when they create a phishing attack, that it's very realistic. Okay, and they also use AI very heavily. Now, we made it a whole solid 10 minutes in before we talked about AI, which has got to be a record. But they use AI really heavily to actually replicate major brands. They replicate brand imagery, tone of voice. The old things that we used to say about don't click on emails that are badly formatted or have bad English is probably actually now bad advice, because let's be honest, most of the protagonists involved in these cybercrime activities, they're not native English speakers, but AI just means they can generate emails that are perfectly formatted in English. So what this is speaking to really is that we need to train humans. Humans are a key part of the defense mechanism. We shouldn't consider humans who click on links to be stupid, and instead what we should be doing is empowering those individuals to detect as much as possible where a phishing or some kind of malicious or ill-intended email has actually arrived into the organization. So that moves us on to some organizational challenges. And there are a number of organizational challenges that go alongside the supposed technology challenges. The astute amongst you are going to realize very, very quickly that this number adds up to 100%. And the reason for that is obvious. Organizations will frequently cite more than one reason why, from an organizational perspective, they've fallen victim. These are all topics of conversation that we can definitely promote Sophos products and services. So the first of which we're going to talk about is protection challenges. So this is in many cases where protection is in place, but maybe it's not configured properly. We have protection in place, but maybe we've not bought the appropriate brands. And therefore the protection isn't as good as it could be. And these things we can definitely, as I say, talk about the Sophos ecosystem. So if the organization you're talking to is already a Sophos customer, let's talk to them about a health check. Okay, let's make sure they're configured properly, they're up to date, they're doing all the right things, they're following best practice. If they're not Sophos customers, let's consider the protection they have got, because when we look at particular common ransomware techniques like remote ransomware, and I'm not going to go into remote ransomware now. If you want to, if you don't know what remote ransomware is, please go Google it. It is responsible for about 60% of, or upwards of 80%, depending on who you ask, of ransomware attacks. And yet, almost every cybersecurity vendor doesn't protect against it. Sophos does. So this is one example where you could buy a solution and you think you're protected, but because of the inadequacies of that solution, it's not actually keeping the organization secure. So do check that one out. That is definitely something to look for. So once again, that's remote ransomware. And then you've got resource challenges. Again, we're squarely back into the realm of human challenges here. Lack of expertise is often cited, either the skills themselves or the capacity. Cybersecurity is a 24 by 7 gig, right? You cannot do it 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and expect to keep yourself secure. You've got to do it quickly as well, because the time from initial penetration of a cybercrime activity through to successful completion and action on objective is shrinking massively. We used to talk about dwell time in matters of weeks and months. We now frequently talk about dwell time in a case of hours. The average time of dwell is still 5 days, but that number comes down every single year. So you've got to be quicker and slicker at detecting things. And then finally, you've got security gaps. And this is a combination of things. Security gaps and weaknesses like the fact you aren't 24 by 7, for example. Security gaps might also be products that you've neglected to buy. Maybe organizations feel they can't afford it or can't run it. Again, we can talk about Software Central. We can talk about the plethora of products that we've got. So we can close all those security loopholes. But security gaps can also be challenges that organizations just hadn't considered before. So we can start talking about things like posture assessment. Have you considered that your mobile devices might be a threat, for example? So we can advise organizations on how to maximize their coverage and close as many of those security gaps as they possibly can. So that gives you some organizational and some technology reasons why organizations get penetrated. Um, the next obvious question is what happens to the data when you get hit? And in almost every case, the goal of the cyber criminal is to encrypt your data and then obviously hold you to ransom and expect you to pay the ransom demands so that you get your data back. And what you see here on the screen, again, if we look towards the purple, we'll see that the successful data encryption rate is actually starting to drop. But it's still 50% worldwide. And what that means is in 50% of cases, the cybersecurity solutions that have been put in place have just not succeeded. They've not covered the organization successfully. Um, and if you've got to the point of data being encrypted, a lot of things have gone wrong by that point. The crims have got in, they've escalated privileges, a whole load of things have happened before we've got to that point. So this is not a good story. And it's not a good story, particularly in the UK and Ireland. So that number of 50% of successful ransomware attacks, if you just looked at UK and Ireland statistics, what you find is that is still 70%. And we think one of the main reasons behind that is this concept of remote ransomware. So again, looking back at remote ransomware, many cybersecurity solutions are not covering it, and that's particularly a weak spot within the UK and Ireland. That is our conjecture as to why that statistic is so high. I will also draw your attention very briefly as well to the light blue. The light blue is a new or a developing form of attack where the cyber criminals actually don't want to encrypt your data and they are simply stealing data and then threatening to publicize that data. This is growing. It's grown from 3% last year to 6% of attacks this year. So it's still a relatively small proportion of the attacks. But this is a particular challenge because if you get a ransom note on your screen, you kind of know that you've got a problem. There are lots of precursory signs that are relatively easy to spot by comparison to data exfiltration, which is really hard to spot. And that's the only sign that you get that you're a victim of this kind of extortion attack until the point where you actually get the demands coming through. So that's definitely an attack vector to watch and one that we're very interested in. But looking specifically at data being encrypted, how do organizations recover, or do they recover, is the next question that comes up in the State of Ransomware report. And what we see here is another, unfortunately, a bit of a tale of woe. In 49% of cases, organizations have elected to pay the cyber criminals off. So they've paid to the ransom in the hope that they get their data back. Now, I cannot emphasize enough how this is a really bad scenario, because, first of all, by paying the cyber criminals off, what we're actually doing is we're kicking the can down the road. We are perpetuating the problem. We're actually encouraging more people into this industry, and I do use the word industry very, very deliberately. Um, by paying the cyber criminals off, it's just encouraging more ransomware is the key takeaway. So there's this whole kind of social, moral, ethical conversation around paying the cyber criminals off. I'm going to emphasize as well that actually paying the cyber criminals off is generally speaking not a great ROI either. You will get roughly 50% of your data back. Some people ask me, do cyber criminals actually want to give your data back? And the answer is kind of generally speaking, yes. There are a small number of outlying gangs who's basically fly by night, even by cybercrime standards, who actually just don't want to give you data back. They have no intention of giving you data back at all. But those gangs, they don't hang around very long, because as soon as word gets out that they're not going to give your data back, then why would anybody pay? So that business model falls apart really quickly. The reality is, however, that crims invest a lot more effort and money into how to encrypt your data versus the recovery tools. So whilst they do intend to give your data back, then it's not particularly successful. You can't choose the 50% of data you get. You can't choose the format in. It's generally a bit of a mess. So that's the argument around paying the ransom off. I'm also going to draw your attention to this as well. Now, this is another trend that really bothers me. If you look at the turquoise kind of line at the top there, this is the propensity and success of organizations to use backups in order to recover their data. Now, that graph is going in the wrong direction. Right? There's no two ways about it. It is 2025, for goodness sake. We all should know that backing up is an important task. We all should know that we should be backing up, at least according to the 3-2-1 scenario, three backups, two on site, one off site. And yet we still see the use of backups downward turning massively. Now, Sophos don't sell backups, right? I get nothing other than a warm, fuzzy feeling that I'm doing the right thing by telling you to talk to your customers about backups, um, because this is not a good scenario. And this is definitely a trend that we can reverse. Now, I will also emphasize as well that actually what we're seeing here is a double pronged issue here. Organizations are not successfully implementing backup strategies all on their own, but then the cyber criminals are actually getting more astute at damaging backups, and we'll talk about some of the methods that cyber criminals use to damage backups a bit later on. So this is kind of double approach as to why the use of backups is actually going downhill. But this is definitely a trend as an industry that we should be looking at reversing, because unfortunately the consequence in increasing numbers of cases is this: when organizations get hit by ransomware, they just cannot sustain themselves in the long term, and it does cause either the amalgamation and merging of organizations, or organizations just simply going out of business. And this is particularly true for those of you who operate in the small to medium business market. Although looking at the graph here and the average recovery costs, you'll see that obviously SMB recovery costs are lower, but they are disproportionately high. If you look at larger organizations, eventually the cost of recovery just plateaus, it just evens out. But if you're an SMB, you're going to get hit disproportionately hard. And that again is not a pleasant scenario, because the SMB is typically the organization type which is least protected. They don't have the budget, they don't have the skills, they don't have the resources. There's a whole bunch of challenges around SMBs. And it means that organizations of that ilk often are the ones that go out of business. So again, something to bear in mind. I will add as well, by the way, that this does not include regulatory fines. And if you kind of add in regulatory fines, then this number evens out to an extent, but it's still SMBs that kind of feel the pressure the hardest. Talking about pressure, for the first time within the State of Ransomware report, we've actually included as well some of the human impacts of ransomware. And I think this is actually really important, because if you look at most walks of life now, we talk about mental health an awful lot, and rightly so. But IT is one of those sectors that this kind of attitude of kind of just suck it up and get on with it still exists. If an organization gets hit by a data loss or an outage, it's beholden on the IT team to just crack on with it and get it fixed, right? There's no ifs, no buts, there's no consideration of downtime. You just need to make it work. And that's an attitude that really we probably ought to consider changing. And we can see to an extent the impact of that when we look at some of the things that respondents to the state of ransomware have stated. So, for example, you can see here experiences of anxiety, stress, increasing pressure from leadership, increasing workload, none of which is perhaps a surprise. Um, I thought it was interesting that many organizations or individuals within organizations say they experience feelings of guilt. We all kind of more or less want to do a good job. We're all pretty proud of what we do and where we work. So you can kind of understand that if an organization gets hit by ransomware and there's downtime, there's loss of money, loss of jobs, that they kind of feel guilty for that, even if they've done nothing wrong. People just still naturally own that and feel responsible. And then that kind of flows over to things like staff absence. And then right down the bottom there, really interesting stat, which hopefully will focus the mind of the IT managers that you're talking to. 25% of cases where an organization has been hit by ransomware, some leadership members have been replaced. So there's a significant cost, obviously not just to that individual, but also that individual may well have a family, etc., etc. So I think it's really interesting that we are looking at the human cost and the human impacts because we can talk about dollars and pounds and all that sort of stuff, but actually, people are much more important than those things, and yet we don't traditionally consider those things. So again, something just to consider when you're engaging with customers. So looking at the attacks, how they execute, how they recover is fine, but we ought to understand a bit more about who the cyber criminals are and what they do and what their motivations are. Now this is what the media would tell you a cyber criminal looks like. They are universally portrayed as teenagers in hoodies, hanging out in mom and pop's basement. It's usually dimly lit like this, but I never really understood why that's the case. But this is actually quite a long way from the reality of what cybercrime actually looks like in the modern era. So let me show you this image. This is not a stock image. First of all, this image has been very deliberately selected by myself. This is the place called Gorod Stolis, which is somewhat akin to Canary Wharf but it's in Moscow. So this is a very expensive piece of real estate where very large organizations set up camp. And the reason I've selected this image is it actually probably represents quite well what a cyber criminal looks like on their way to work, because this particular building is directly linked to at least two major ransomware and cybercrime gangs. The first of which, if we roll the clock back to 2025, roll the clock back to 2015, I should say. Then an organization called Ryuk, which later on became Conti, set up camp here, and this was their headquarters. And we know about Conti's headquarters for reasons that will become apparent in a short while. But if we fast forward to 2025, very recently, a Russian cybercrime gang was actually taken down by the local authorities, which is very, very unusual. And they were actually taken down for reasons that are not necessarily the most obvious. So the Russian authorities had zero interest in their cybercrime activities, but this particular gang did reach the attention of the authorities when they decided that it was a good idea to set up an import and export business. Essentially, what they wanted to do is convert Bitcoin into fiat currency, and they used Bitcoin to acquire lots of sought after Western luxury goods and import it into Russia. And the reason they fell foul of the authorities was nothing to do with the cybercrime, but the fact that they failed to pay the appropriate duties on those imports. So they're actually taken down for tax evasion, nothing to do with the cybercrime activities. And again, we'll talk about the police attitude towards cybercrime in a short while. But what we've got here is the same building 10 years apart, still being used as a major headquarters for cybercrime. So most cyber criminals go to the office, and that's pretty well illustrated by this graph. If we map the initial attacks against UK time, so adjusting by 3 hours for the time difference, what we see is that cyber criminals rock up at 9 o'clock in the morning, grab a cup of coffee, probably chat with their mates. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, that's kind of peak operation time. Take a nice little break for lunch, come back refreshed, and hit it hard at 1 o'clock. And then you see productivity turning off about 4 o'clock, maybe checking their emails, doing some other stuff, and then scooting off home at 5 o'clock at night. If you map SDR productivity to this graph, it basically looks the same. Okay, so this is literally people's 9 to 5. Um, And that gives you a little bit of an indication about how organized the cyber criminals are. There are actually a very small number of cybercrime gangs. If you look at this graph, which I appreciate is a bit of an eye chart, what you see here is if we wind back from 2021 through to 2025, this is ransomware by colors, by numbers. Every gang here is responsible in some way for ransomware, but you can see there's actually a relatively small number, and actually an even smaller number that are actually active at any one time. So these are some of the key players, and basically what this tells us is that ransomware is conducted almost exclusively by one of a very small number of highly organized gangs. And we know a bit about gang structure because of Conti. So remember that transition from Riot through to Conti. Conti gave us a really interesting insight into the world of cybercrime because, as you've seen, Conti was headquartered in Moscow, but many of the affiliates, so many of the gang members who were um, taking part in cybercrime activities on behalf of Conti, they were actually Ukrainian citizens. Um, and what happened at the start of the Ukrainian conflict actually was a really interesting exercise in poor judgment of internal politics because Conti announced very publicly that they were going to support Russia's activities in the Ukraine using cyber means and would respond to Western aggressors. And you can imagine the Ukrainian contingent were not massively on board with that particular message. And what happened is Conti basically disintegrated really quickly, and the Ukrainian affiliates just spilled the guts of Conti over the internet. So we got literally thousands of internal communiques. We got evidence of individuals' names, addresses, links allegedly to the FSB. We saw internal documentation, and what we learned is we are definitely not looking at teenagers in basements. We are looking more like you have a 9 to 5, you have a line manager, a HR department, you have a monthly target, you have a monthly salary, there's marketing, there's career progression. I mean, does any of this stuff sound familiar? Because this is literally like a legitimate business in every way, except the way they actually go about making their money. So that gave us a real insight into the world of cybercrime. And you can actually see where Conti falls apart if you look at the graph. So Conti is this kind of mauvey color down the bottom here, and they were quite successful, and then all of a sudden it kind of just falls apart and disintegrates. But much like the mythical Hydra, one gang disappears and another leader just takes over. So another head grows and another gang develops. And actually, many of the key leaders and protagonists actually kind of move into the next gang. And the next sort of gang that really came to the fore was Lockbit. Now, Lockbit is a really interesting cybercrime gang because they capitalized on the this integration of Conti and were very successful. So Conti is this kind of gold color which you see next, and you see them carrying out this array of activities and being very successful. However, this is a very rare occasion where actually law enforcement managed to capture the gangs and actually take down their activities. So much of the infrastructure behind Lockbit was actually not in Russia and was dotted around the world, and actually fell under the jurisdiction and reach of many of the Western law enforcement organizations. So without going into too many details, Western law enforcement managed to penetrate this gang, actually own their infrastructure, and then ultimately take it down. And in many cases, actually give organizations their data back and actually provide them with the recovery keys that they needed. And SecureWorks, now part of Sophos, was actually credited for some of the activities associated with that takedown. So SecureWorks were a very big part of Operation Kronos. And again, if you want to do some Googling and find out some of the stuff that we do in CTU and how we help law enforcement, that's actually a really good example. And you can actually see the results of that operation and that takedown, where that gold bar just kind of disappears off. You will notice that it very briefly spikes back again. And that is one thing that people who are very observant actually do ask me about. And what you have to understand here is that all of these cybercrime gangs, they're actually competing for hacker resources. So there's this kind of job market for affiliates, and gangs will advertise like higher returns, better security, better tools, better software. And this is an illustration where a gang has actually tried to look like they are continuing their operations. So that little spike there is actually fake victims that have been published on the Lockbit website to try and make it look like the brand is still active. But this was them really trying to cover their assets just before the gang actually ultimately just fell to pieces. Um, but the gang itself disintegrated. But again, key protagonists, they just move on to another gang, and you can see how they acted with impunity when you look at this video. So this is some of the gang members of an organization called E Corp. Many of the gang members have fantastic supercars, and a lot of them have that kind of urban color scheme that you see, that urban camouflage color scheme. This is a video of them literally doing donuts around police cars in Moscow. That was a pet tiger on the passenger seat, by the way, if you were wondering. And the head of that particular gang, a guy called Malcolm Jakobitz, has one of his vehicles that has a number plate that translates to thief on it. I mean, just so you know how avert these people are, they are literally functionally immune from law enforcement. And what it means is when one gang falls apart and they have internal politics and it doesn't work, then they just move on to somewhere else. And we end up playing this game of basically gang whack-a-mole. We're trying to take one gang down, another one comes up in its place. And what you see when you look really closely at this and look at the trends is you see the cycles of gang rising and then disintegrating. It's massively accelerating. So Klopp was a name on everybody's lips in IT for a little while, and particularly actually because of the kind of era they ushered in of quadruple extortion. So Klopp was a really good example of a gang that would basically rinse victims for all they were worth. And what we mean by quadruple extortion in this scenario is holding the organization to ransom by encrypting their data, threatening them with DDoS, threatening them with doxing, i.e., publishing their data externally. And then actually what they did for the fourth tier is they actually exploited the service users and customers of the victim organization. And probably the most cynical example of Klopp doing that was actually a Swedish mental health institution. And what they did was not only did they hold the mental health institution itself to ransom, but then all the service users were contacted individually and they were threatened with having their mental health records published over the internet. Now, you can imagine how that, depending on the contents, could be quite devastating. And it also shows a complete lack of morals, just so you know the kind of people that you're dealing with in the world of cybercrime. So you can see that acceleration of different gangs coming up. There is this kind of really interesting situation of entropy. You know, ever since major gangs like Lockbit and Conti before them have gone away, then there's always disturbance, but that disturbance again is increasing. And a good example of some of this disturbance is actually quite easy to illustrate when we look at a particular gang called Dragon Force. Who you might have heard of in conjunction with the recent retail attacks. So let me give you a very brief potted history of Dragon Force, just to kind of bring you up to speed on the latest developments. So Dragon Force actually started out live as a pro-Palestinian activist group, and they recycled a lot of tools from Conti and Lockbit, who we've heard of before. They recycled the tools, they recycled the technology, and started hacking for political purposes, which is reasonably unusual. But yeah, by no means are the only political activist group out there. But they realized really quickly that actually the tool set that they got could allow them to make money. So they pivoted very, very quickly, forgot about the political morals and motivations, and instead started to sell their services for ransomware purposes, and basically started out selling traditional ransomware as a service type models. So competing for activists to join their group and then carrying out activities. But they've been really busy disrupting the ransomware ecosystem. So you see across cybercrime gangs this kind of rebranding going on. So Ransom Bay very quickly got redirected into being a Dragon Force extension, and probably not with consent. We've seen them defacing other cybercrime gang websites as well, and actively recruiting hacktivists and hackers using tools like the Ramp Forum, which is kind of a cybercrime hangout. So they're actively trying to disrupt other ransomware gangs and bring those affiliates into the world of Dragon Force. And although the victim count itself is quite low, what you see is this growth in Dragon Force activity happening really quickly. One of the things that really appeals to people who want to join a cybercrime gang, which is not a lifestyle choice I would advocate, incidentally. But one of the things that makes Dragon Force appealing is that they advertise themselves as being able to offer stable payments. So really good back end for payment systems, obviously using Bitcoin and other kind of cryptocurrencies. but also offering an anonymity, right? So you can work with that paranoia. You're not going to get caught by the law enforcement, and actually also giving you a bunch of really nice tool set that you can work with. So you can really easily take Dragon Force and you can rebrand it. You can put your own logo on there. You can put your own color scheme on there. You don't have to be an IT expert or a marketing expert to kind of build your own brand here. And then you can also choose from a functional perspective as to what systems are targeted, how they get encrypted, how they get recovered. So you can see here you can select like different operating systems, different platforms, and how that all works. And you can test your encryption and decryption as well. There is a support desk. And you can get help with this stuff as well. So if you're not like massively techie, you can kind of get guidance on this stuff. It's kind of like ransomware by numbers at this point. And you can even choose your kind of call to action. So this is the ransom note that a victim might see. It's not like Hollywood. There's no fancy graphics and explosions and stuff going off. It's a really mundane kind of ransom note. But I will direct your eyes to point six. So one of the affiliates of Dragon Force at least has been very entrepreneurial. So if you see point six there, it does offer you the opportunity to receive a detailed report telling the victims exactly how we compromise their security, and also telling you how to avoid such situations in the future. So giving you security advice. Now, I would posit that there's probably better ways to understand what your gaps in security look like, but there you go as an example of again taking a victim and really rinsing them for everything that they're worth. And you can see this kind of disruption. So because um, Dragon Force use many of the other tool sets, then you see this last sort of 2025 graph here has got a lot of multiple different colors in here because of all the recycling of old tools. Dragon Force and Dragon Force affiliates have also hit the news as well because interestingly, some of the affiliates are not actually within Russia, which again is reasonably unusual. We have seen instances of UK citizens, because of the fact they speak English natively, have actually started to do social engineering attacks using things like telephones. So impersonating help desks using the fact that they're native English speakers. Obviously, if you call up somebody and say, I need you to reset your password, and you've got a thick Russian accent, you're probably not going to get as far as you would if you've got a kind of friendly Scottish accent, let's say. So anyway, that's Dragon Force and what they've been up to, particularly in the world of retail, as I've already alluded to. Now you might be wondering at this point, well, why am I telling you all this stuff, and why is this important to you as a cybersecurity provider, and why is it important to your customers? It's really important to understand at least some detail the kind of resources that these people have at their disposal, right? So obviously we've seen the financial resources that they've got, but also they have this huge volume of human resources as well. And what this means is that in reality, that most successful ransomware attacks, there's usually a human at the other end of the line, okay? And this presents a really big problem for defense because when you're fighting humans, it's very difficult because humans will adapt, they'll try new techniques. As we already learned, humans are notoriously unpredictable and they have an ability to innovate. So now the challenge here is going out and buying tech and expecting that tech to protect you successfully in 2025 is no longer realistic. Okay. And the reasons behind that are primarily that we deal with humans that can adapt and mask their techniques. So these are some of the things that we see common cybercrime activities. No particular order. Um, Multi-stage attacks, remote ransomware. Again, Google it. Really, really good illustration of a basic multi-stage attack. Attack starts somewhere, finishes up somewhere else. Now you extrapolate that through to supply chain, and you've got other organizations. It's really difficult to spot what's going on. It's hard for security solutions and security teams to see the whole picture. Let's go next to credential abuse. So this is typically usernames and passwords being compromised by social engineering. Sometimes it's multi-factor tokens being hijacked or passwords being guessed. In all these cases, however, from a technology perspective, the user has presented appropriate credentials and they've logged in. Now, it is really difficult for IT to work out is this actual John, or is this John having identity credentials compromised and basically then breaking into the organization. Tech cannot help you differentiate between the two because it's a successful login. Um, you could look at living off the land. Now, living off the land is by far and away the most successful ransomware approach. This is using organizations' own IT tools against them. So using RDP, using PowerShell, two really basic examples. We use this stuff all the time. You probably use this stuff within your organization to support your customers. Now, the problem is, I've just told you that you can take these tools and as a cyber criminal, you can turn them against the organization. And that's a real problem because you can't turn this stuff off. This is important to an organization's workflow, but now all of a sudden they can be weaponized and used against an organization. And again, how can you expect tech to tell the difference? And this is a legitimate tool, but it's just been used in a bad way. That is not a technology problem. And then last but not least, exploiting weaknesses. And we've hopefully I've already illustrated the cyber criminals will exploit any weakness. The fact you're not 24/7, the fact you haven't updated your software, the fact that you failed to put antivirus on one of your computers, that's all great from a cyber criminal's perspective. They just will find any loophole that they can. So how do we combat the challenges? Well, actually, what we need to do is be more observant with the data that we already have available at our disposal, because there are always warning signs, and yet organizations fail to spot them. Over and over again, organizations fail to see the warning signs. We think in 83% of cases that we've investigated incident response, we can categorically point you to things that tell us an organization is about to become a victim. Now, bearing in mind the cybercrime MO is that you delete your trail afterwards, that's still a massive proportion of these attacks. And these trails of breadcrumbs could be really simple things. Cybercriminals logging in, escalating privileges, stealing other credentials on the estate, exfiltrating data, then ultimately, obviously, encrypting the data itself. There's always going to be this kind of trail of breadcrumbs that goes on, and yet organizations fail to spot them. The problem is that trying to spot this stuff is a little bit akin to looking for a needle in a haystack, right? If you think about a common network and a common estate, every laptop, every desktop, every switch, every access point, every firewall, every router, well, more or less every bit of software, they're all generating logs. Okay. And somewhere in one of those logs, there might be just something that tells you that you're about to become a victim, but spotting it is very, very difficult. Now, the industry response, and you've probably been involved in promoting this, has been to give you more technology. Go out, buy yourself some tools. The problem with any kind of tool like EDR, XDR is it gives you tools and it gives you the ability to search, but we already learned tech on its own isn't enough. You need skills. And buying these tools is not going to make you a threat hunter. In the same way that if I go to the sports goods shop and I buy myself a set of boxing gloves, I am not going to become a fighter, right? It's not in my nature. It's not who I am. Tools is one thing, the ability to use it is something else. And this is why we talk a lot about our stance really that cybersecurity is too difficult for almost every organization to deal with effectively on their own. Right? If you turn on a TV, open a web browser, and you see hotel groups, airlines, banks, government organizations which have huge resources at their disposal failing to do cybersecurity properly, how on earth could you expect the Acme Sprocket company with 5 employees to cover themselves? It's just unrealistic. The reality of cybersecurity is it's too difficult to do on your own. We believe the best cybersecurity outcomes come through collaboration. So we talk a lot about the collaboration tier of managed detection and response. This is where we have a team of experts that monitor estates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Those precursory signs that we talked about, what our MDR team do is they look for as much of that as they possibly can. Interestingly, not just within our product set. Okay, so obviously Sophos, we still make endpoint, we still make firewalls, we still do switches and access points and all that sort of thing. And yes, of course, we take that information, but we know that organizations have lots of other technologies. They might have already invested cybersecurity somewhere else, and they might have a firewall from a different vendor, and that's okay because we can still take that telemetry and we can still feed it into the hive mind. Because what we want to do is get that information really as rapidly as possible, contextualized, and then placed in front of a human analyst. So where telemetry comes from other vendors, we standardize it, normalize it, basically group it together, and then put it in front of a human analyst. Because what we want to do is shut down an incident as fast as we possibly can. So the mean time to respond to an incident, as you can see on the screen here, is 1 minute to create a case, put it in front of a human analyst. 25 minutes on average for that human then to rationalize, is this real? If it is a real problem, how big is it? What do we do about it? And then there's a fork in the road at this point. So some organizations, some end users, they want to be woken up at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And if that's what they want, that's cool. We'll phone them. Some channel partners run a service desk and would like us to call them. And if you guys want to be the heroes and roll up your sleeves and fix the problem, then that's okay. We can give you the notes and you can go and be the hero that fixes the problem. Alternatively, many people actually just prefer the concept of Sophos responding on their behalf. And if we do that, we can remote into machines, we can kick out malicious processes, shut down accounts, etc., which takes a further 12 minutes. So if you go down that route, the mean time to respond is 38 minutes. Now, I appreciate that 38 minutes is potentially a slightly abstract number. And it is difficult to compare against other cybersecurity vendors in this space. But what I did find is a an incident closure rate based on internal SOC teams. This was a Gartner survey. And first of all, I'm going to illustrate that if you are running an internal security team, you're already a big player, right? You've got to be a bank, an airline, a hotel group, something of that ilk. And yet we still see the median time to respond is 16 hours. Now, 16 hours in cyber, as I'm sure you're acutely aware, is an eternity. It is an eternity in which nothing good is going to happen. The criminals will be stealing your data. They'll be encrypting your data. They'll be leaving back doors to come back to some point in the future, right? Nothing good is going to happen in this time. So shutting down an incident as fast as possible is really the key value of MDR, and that's really what organizations pay for. But I'm just going to leave you with one other thought because sometimes we don't always talk about the peripheral benefits of MDR. So just some other superior cybersecurity outcomes that you get. Give you two examples. One, I talked earlier on about backups. Right now, bear in mind, State of Ransomware report tells us 94% of ransomware attacks, the criminals are going after your backups. Now, the reason is obvious, right? If you don't have a decent backup, you are much more likely to pay for the ransom. So deleting a backup is key. But they don't delete backups in obvious ways, right? If they just wiped the volume, it's kind of obvious. But what they would do instead is they would change the scope of the backup. So when you go to recover, what you find is one picture of a kitten, right? It's useless. But you still get your email every day saying backup complete, backup complete. Only when you go to recover, you find out you've got no data. Or alternatively, they just simply change the passwords, right? So again, you get an email backup complete, backup complete. Next time you log in because you're trying to recover, you got no access because they changed the password. Now, all of those things are case creating events. So if you align yourself to one of the backup and recovery vendors that are on the screen here and you change your password, you will get a phone call, right? And we will verify that that is you actually changing your password. Another good example of something that we wouldn't spot if we didn't look at other people's telemetry. Business email compromise. It is a really, really common attack vector. One of the best illustrations is somebody logs into Office 365, they create a redirect rule. Everything that contains words like invoice or order, we mark it as read, we forward it to cyber criminals, we delete the message, right? And then what happens next is the cyber criminals, they just change the bank details on the invoice and they send it back. And then somebody in accounts payable is merely paying the invoices. Okay. How do you find out about that? Well, you find out 28 days later on average because your suppliers call you up and they say, well, where's my money at? You haven't paid your bills. And then you've got this double problem, right? Because you've got a bunch of upset suppliers and you've also got no money in your bank because the cyber criminals have just been receiving all of that money. Okay. No antivirus in the world is going to detect that because there is no virus, there's no malware, there's no hacking going on. This is literally just compromising business processes. Now, if you create a redirect rule in Microsoft and you have our MDR telemetry switched on for it, and that redirect rule looks a bit ropey, then again, you will get a phone call and we will verify that you deliberately wanted to send it to some shonky Gmail account. So again, hidden benefits of having that integration is absolutely key. The other hidden benefit as a final thought for you is we're one of the world's largest providers of MDR. So we have an excess of 34,000 organizations running our MDR service. And I don't tell you that just because I want to show off about it. My point here is that we actually conduct these threat investigations way more than local MSPs do, way more than actually most of our competition do. And it exposes us to this world of really interesting what we call in the industry IOCs, TTPs, basically the tools, the tactics, the characteristics of cybercrime activities. We do not want to waste any of that information because it is all valuable information. One of the cardinal sins of running a SOC is investigating the same incident more than once because you are burning analysts' time. Analysts are expensive. And you're burning analysts' time, wasting their time, right? Because you've seen this attack before, you know how this pans out. We don't want to investigate the same incident more than once. So when we see, let's take a really basic example. Let's take phishing. I'm talking about phishing a lot. A phishing attack happens in deepest, darkest Peru. We know what the email addresses were where the attack came from. We know the URLs it's trying to get you to click on. If there are attachments or other characteristics, we know what the characteristics of that phishing email is. We take that attack in deepest, darkest Peru. We take the IOCs, the TTPs. 45 minutes later, customers here in London, if they're running our email protection, they're automatically having those emails blocked. Okay, it is like buying into this big worldwide cybersecurity club in which everybody benefits, right? If you're selling to solicitors, we got a bunch of them. You're selling to banks, we got a bunch of them. You're selling to manufacturing companies, we've got a lot of manufacturing companies. All right, the industry trends that we see, the types of attacks, the techniques deployed, we're seeing them. And what it means, like I said, is everybody buys into this club, which everybody benefits from. Right? We free analyst time up, allows us to be leaner, but it gives us better cybersecurity outcomes because blocking at a technology level is more sustainable and much more reliable than relying on a human to do it. So, big worldwide cybersecurity club. Right. I've talked a lot and I'm really conscious that you might have some questions. So I'm going to wrap up super quick. Key things you need to take away from this session. Cybercrime is changing, right? Buying tech is not enough on its own. You need humans to be empowered. Empower humans to detect malicious emails and respond accordingly. If you have training services that you can sell to customers, sell them training services. Bang for buck, it is one of the best investments in cybersecurity that you can ever make. Okay. But expecting users to get 100% success and never clicking on anything ever is unrealistic. So technology on its own to protect is not enough either. Just buying EPP, just buying firewall isn't going to cut it in 2025. You need humans to investigate incidents. Now, if your end user has a support desk that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're skilled threat analysts, just give them a bunch of tools, right? Sophos XDR is an awesome tool. Taegis is an awesome tool. Go crack on with those and allow them to be really good threat hunters. The reality is that almost all of your customers, however, cannot commit to 24 by 7 by 365 threat hunting, in which case they're better off outsourcing those really important responsibilities to somebody like Sophos so that we can give them the very best analyst experience and shut down those incidents as fast as possible. And with all of that said, I'm now going to shut up, take a breath. And Lewis, can you see if there's any questions on any things that you've seen there? If you haven't asked a question yet, type away. Cyber criminal tactics, Sophos products, services, anything you like, fire away, and I'll see what I can do to help.
We either have a very quiet bunch or it was that concise of a presentation that you've stunned everyone into silence. But look, thank you
Okay.
very much, John. I've seen that a handful of times now, and even every time I see it, I'm picking more and more information out of it as well. There's so much and it's so in depth. So really appreciate your time. What I'll do for everyone on the webinar, I'll follow up after this anyway with a copy of the recording, so you've all got that. And then if you do have any questions off the back of it that you haven't thought of now, just ping them across. And again, if it's a question that we can't answer as TD Synex, we'll loop in people like John and the like over at Sophos' side and make sure we get everything answered.
Awesome.
Um,
Thank you. In that
and
case, if
just
you
a quick
did it to
heads up as well, sorry, for everyone that is on the webinar, we can also replicate this kind of presentation and webinar with your partners as well, or with some of your sales team, customers, and whoever else might be interested in this kind of information.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to fill the void by just doing a shameless pitch. So, as well as doing this, I also do a monthly technical update, which takes you through new products and services and stuff that we're doing at Sophos and keeps you up to date. So, if you want to know more about what we're doing on a monthly basis, then that's again a perfectly safe QR code that you can scan that will get you registered for that as well.
We've just had a question come in as we
Ah,
were chatting,
cool.
which says, uh, would you say with the recent first detection of an AI cyber attack, are we likely to see that increase and people using that route more often?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the reality is right now, that we see AI being used by the cyber criminals to create phishing. So as I've already mentioned, replicate brand, replicate tone of voice, replicate language. There have been some interesting forays into getting AI to write code, and because we infiltrate cybercrime forums and stuff, we've actually watched the fallout. And a bit like legitimate businesses, they're kind of in turmoil about whether AI is a good thing or a bad thing, and whether it's actually going to live up to the hype. We actually, one of my favorites in another presentation, I have a screen grab of a cyber criminal actually asking for a refund for an AI tool that they've bought because it didn't do the job properly. The reality is that most of the kind of AI code that's written is not particularly stellar. But AI capabilities are accelerating so rapidly that that is definitely something which we ought to be concerned about and ought to be monitoring. But the real, all I can really comment on is the reality of right now is that AI is actually used in much more mundane ways for basically for presenting convincing attacks from a social engineering perspective.
Perfect. Hopefully, it's answered the question for whoever sent that in. And like I say, we'll follow up anyway. So any more questions, we'll be here and all is to listen to them. But yeah, thanks again, John. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Appreciate everyone's time who's joined us on the webinar this morning. And hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
Cheers, guys.